Hi, I'm Stephen Martin, Executive Vice President, Change Healthcare, and I am delighted to be here today. I've had a long history in technology going back to the early days of the internet. I was at Netscape just as the commercial internet was getting going. I spent time in Silicon Valley, then spent almost 15 years at Microsoft working on server technology, and then started this little project known as Azure and watched that business explode. In all my time in technology, I had a sinking feeling that this was all too easy. Customers were chasing us, not enough focus on marginal cost or profitability, not worried about interest rates, not really worried about recruiting as the next generation of best and brightest wanted to join these kinds of companies, not worried enough about return on invested capital, not worried enough on culling technologies and products and offerings that weren't hitting the financial mark. So I went to GE as the Chief Digital Officer for Energy and was also the interim CEO of GE Digital. Very different. Customer obsessed, like we were previously, but also focused on profitability and retention. Fighting for customers every single day. Having customers walk away if you couldn't meet the mark because there was so much competition in those spaces. Having to deal with the reality that customers face choice every single day. They weren't chasing you, we were chasing them. I also had an epiphany at GE that there were three things that really matter for humanity: water, energy, and healthcare. And I decided then and there to devote as much of my career as possible to those specific industries. So here I am. I still ride on a Peloton, although no more bike racing, but working on things that really matter. I use this particular illustration to point out things that if you think you're racing a bike and you're doing it indoors without the threat of competition, you're not really doing it. And so I challenge everybody out there to think about the customer obsession that we have, think about serving customers and making sure that we're going to do it in an environment that's not just the easy way where people are chasing us, but we're having to work for every single dollar. Change Healthcare is one of the most important players in the healthcare business that you've probably never heard of. Every time you go to the doctor and they ask you, hey, is your insurance up to date? Is your coverage up to date? Anything to add? Odds are what they're also doing in the background is running an eligibility check. We connect payers to providers. We manage claims, we help them fight waste, and we deal with that exact transaction of, are you eligible for those services? What is your copay if you have one in this particular case? What is your payer willing to cover? All of the financial details of that transaction are the businesses that we're in addition to partnering with governments to help fight waste, fraud, and abuse across Medicare. We also deliver clinical solutions and deal with things like interoperability. So when you have to move from one doctor to another, more of your patient records can be accessed by that new doctor when you say it's okay. The United States spends $4.3 trillion a year on healthcare. Yes, that's $4.3 trillion. And that's 20% of the GDP in the United States. And in general, although this year might be an exception, the cost associated there rise faster than the cost of inflation. We're focused on reducing that $300 billion in waste, which is a part of the healthcare system. And our mission is to enable a better, more efficient healthcare system all day, every day. And when you're riding a bike or on a car or in a car and you're winding up this winding road, you might not be able to see the top. But we're at it every day, marching forward, bringing new solutions to market, trying to improve the experience. Small things like automating payments for payers to ensure that back office staff didn't have to go to the office during COVID. Now, that may sound small, but a significant percentage of hospitals and providers throughout the United States still go to their mailbox and open checks from providers to be paid for the services that they provide. Ensuring that those folks didn't have to do that by automating that process was a simple thing that we could do to keep more people safe throughout the pandemic. And that was something that was really important, and we did it with the partnership with AWS. As you all know, this is a tough industry. It's highly regulated. And as every account manager knows from AWS, I can't accept dinner from anybody there, and I stick to that rule very, very, very litigiously. We dealt with COVID for the last 2 years. We deal with significant amounts of technical debt as the primary focus of our industry is on providing care rather than dealing with really sophisticated IT. You also know that we were the target of cyber attacks for the last couple of years. Never in history has there been such a focused effort on a particular industry where we saw cyber attacks relentlessly day after day after day. And on top of that, if it wasn't enough with COVID and technical debt and cyber, we also saw massive amounts of consolidation in this industry, which meant that a lot of underlying technology changed over again. When I joined, I knew I had my work cut out for me. Our mission, again, to modernize technology, improve engineering excellence, improve security, move to the cloud, and build a platform for the future. We started with 72 unique data centers. We're now down to 18 and 3 cloud providers, 3,500 technical employees and contractors, and buried within that was a project to move the systems that drive those claims that I talked about at the beginning, including the authorizations from proprietary data centers covered under a TSA to the cloud. We had 15 months to do it, no exceptions, no extensions. Decommissioning of those systems would happen in early 2022, whether we were ready or not. We had to get the bulk of those core systems to AWS. We had to get out of these non-standard data centers and ensure that we were coalescing on a smaller number of resources that we could take care of. In the process of doing that, we also had to close over 30 sites as people adopted work from home to deal with COVID. And through that, without even trying, we doubled our footprint of all of the compute that we were using in AWS. It was really hard work. And I know this is a cliche, but replacing the wings while you're in the air is something that's really tough to do, especially on a system that simply cannot go down. We know how important it is. We know how mission critical this particular system is. It simply cannot go down. People are reliant on this system to get healthcare every single day. And so there was no option other than to keep it running, rebuild for the future, and migrate this into a modern environment in AWS. We relied on AWS's expertise, including professional services, as well as AMS. And we found something that was really interesting through this. What I was really impressed with was the attitude of everyone at AWS. It was a can-do attitude. It was a move forward attitude. And sure, we had our hard days. We had days where we weren't really sure what the next step was, and AWS was there with us every step, telling us we just had to move forward. Just move forward, keep going, keep iterating, and we made progress. In just under 2 years since I started, we completed that mission on time and on budget, thanks to AWS. We picked up those mission critical systems out of all of those proprietary data centers and moved them into cloud, benefiting from all of the modern technology that offered. Our AWS footprint has gone up by an order of magnitude in totality since we started on this. And we added features now in a very, very straightforward manner because we've torn down a lot of our application barriers between systems of one kind, be it of record, or applications that offer value in a variety of other ways. But the thing that I'm actually the most proud of through all of this is culture. Culture. It's not just training that allows you to stand in front of a fire that's headed for power lines. It's culture as well. When problems hit, are you going to hide? Are you going to blame others? Say you can't, or are you going to face it, know that you have an army behind you that believes in you and knows what you're doing? I learned a lot at Microsoft about the shift from waterfall to DevOps, building for a future and recognizing that not all of your team are going to make that transition. I learned a lot at GE about the reality of transformation and how hard that is, made harder if the people that are being transformed aren't at least co-pilots of that transformation. Is it happening to you or because of you? Makes a huge difference, even if it's just perception. But the reality is, culture is the best source of water. It's what puts out the fire. And in those moments where things are really hard, where your teams are trying to figure out if they can go forward, what's the right path, it's the culture that we adopt that makes the most sense and helps us make progress. On our journey to the cloud and moving these thousands of instances, it wasn't just the mechanics and culture. We learned things along the way. We discovered Amazon Connect. It made a ton of sense given the network traffic, our data infrastructure, and our co-location of our core systems in AWS. We didn't plan on moving out of our call centers and into this Amazon Connect service, but we saw the opportunity and we went with it. We got better cost, we got better functionality, better quality of service, and we're just starting to explore things like sentiment analysis and a variety of other features which we know are going to help. So this was the added benefit of this journey to the cloud, the technology that we picked up and things that we learned along the way, which just made us better, serendipitous, if you will, No actual intent to do this when we started, but we just got better. We were open to new ideas and we learned. Another interesting thing happened along the way. Our platform efforts, which were largely focused on obvious things, identity, data rights, data management, and workflow, began to morph. We learned very quickly that we were building something that was far more important than a set of technologies or tools which were used over and over again. We're actually building a new operating system. We were building a technology stack that would underpin everything that we did. Our ambition isn't just for consistency across common components in an AWS environment, but to ensure the majority of developers in the organization start at the application layer. Far too many people in a technology organization are worried about patching. They're worried about management. They're worried about monitoring. They get those compliance alerts when something isn't quite right. We're trying to get that all for free by getting to a level that builds on top of the platform technologies with an application stack that has most developers starting significantly above that, so that there's a small number of people that are worried about these infrastructure components. It's not easy. We're doing a lot of things as a part of this that will make our job easier for years to come. Consolidation is going to continue. We're going to have to deal with environments that are not always greenfield. In fact, greenfield will remain the exception to the rule. We know that we're building things that are microservices centric that will allow us to build services for customers to meet their needs and evolve as further consolidation in the market happens. We know that we're going to have to be extensible because the role that service providers will play is going to continue to grow and it will change. We'll work with providers that have heavy use on service providers for aspects of what they do. And then in moments, they'll pull that back in, and we need to be able to respond to that. We're also dealing with things like raising our resilience and disaster recovery in a way that we wouldn't necessarily be able to without that. So, what did we learn? Well, there's several things that you might guess that we've learned along the way, but I'm going to narrow it down to five. One, lift and shift doesn't always beat file new. Picking up mission critical infrastructure without failure is really hard. Our focus was on working with what we had and primarily doing lift and shift. And I think that's been a good default. I've learned in many circumstances that trying to get too creative with your architecture and making too many changes at the same time just complicates the matter. So a simple lift and shift is the way to go, and then you modernize from there. However, we had some components that didn't lift and shift very well. And we may have been better off for some of those pieces rather than force that lift and shift and building all of the shims around that to make it work. We may have been better off rewriting some of those in parallel. I know it sounds crazy. It probably gives you nightmares to even think about. It certainly did with me, but I'll admit that we were probably too conservative in some areas on rewriting some components that just would have been better off with a web native infrastructure. Number two, make bigger bets on emergent technology, even if it isn't portable. We talked about this over and over again. What service are we using? Yeah, is it portable? Is it portable? Are we going to be able to carry that with us, or is this something that's proprietary? We were so worried about proprietary that we missed the reality of that we were optimizing for a future without getting the benefit for today. To go back, I made a bet on some of those technologies from AWS, some of those higher level services that would have optimized that, even if it created more work downstream and limited some future optionality. Three, management, monitoring, application triggers aren't as portable into the cloud as you might think. That was really, really big in our learning. We had lots of systems in place that did that, that delivered that functionality, and it just didn't work the same way in a cloud environment as it did on premises or in remote data centers. And we spent a lot more time there rebuilding, re-architecting, working with AMS to get solutions in place for management and monitoring that we weren't assuming that we would need to. And that's absolutely one that we would look at a little bit differently. Another one, don't save cost optimization for last. And I can't overemphasize this. Engineers have to understand the marginal cost of the services that they build from the get-go. If they don't do that, and if you don't have a culture around optimizing from the start, the bidding starts at a 36-core, 60-gig instance, because why not? And then you find out you have a whole lot of work to do afterwards to re-optimize that to get a cost structure that actually makes sense. So creating a culture for driving maximum yield from the smallest footprint from the get-go is really, really, really critical. And last, Listen to the AWS experts, but also seek to understand why. They're giving very valuable information, but sometimes if you just implement and your team lacks the understanding of why it is they're saying what they're saying, you miss some really important nuances. We found that a couple of times as we were going through the process, getting architectural advice. You can't just blindly follow it. It's really important to understand the why behind that, because there may be other pieces to the puzzle that you really have to unpack throughout the way. Part of that journey for us also involved making sure that we understand what it was that we're doing. And I know that sounds really simple, but as your engineering teams are getting into this and they're getting the expertise from AWS and they're understanding the why behind it, you get this explosion of new capabilities. There's lots of things that you can do now that you simply couldn't do before. And all of a sudden, people are having conversations around active, and involved in running things in multiple regions, significantly improving their disaster recovery, optimizing data retention. Why wouldn't you focus on those things? Of course you would. But it can become really easy to lose the focus on what it is that you're doing in that particular moment to advance the cause. We found times where we had cost structures that were really moving in directions that weren't great for us, but then when we unpacked it, we found out that's because we were getting something out of this that was far superior than what we started with. And making sure that people understand all of those components as they're going through is really critical for your success. So why do all this? It's not just to save money or to gain some additional efficiency. We're excited about all the things that this allows us to do, not just in terms of saving the money, but also for serving customers. No more application level isolation means that we can do things for customers regarding social determinants of health that we simply couldn't do before, helping them get more value out of their data with AI in a way that's safe, that's practical, and consistent with what they want to do with the information that they're providing, rather than having all of their information locked away in silos. Working with providers to identify ideal candidates for future drug trials. Again, this is something that we can make available back to the providers to help identify specific people that are a cross section of all of the folks that they serve. That's just the beginning. We want to offer services to customers which are an aggregation of microservices which will evolve to meet their needs and converge with technologies over time like RCM as well as real-time settlement. There's still plenty of work to do, and we're very proud of the partnership with AWS and all that we are doing together to enable a better, more efficient healthcare system. Thank you.